All right, we are back in Gridiron 360. This is Bill. I got Dave. We're talking NFL free agency, and we are sticking with the NFC East as we move on to the Dallas Cowboys, America's team.
In some circles,
or
not
so
in my
say.
circle.
Or so they say. I don't know. Maybe Jerry Jones has ruined that over time. I feel like, they're America's team for a long time, and that was a lot due to the fact that they had really hot cheerleaders. So they were fun to watch.
That doesn't hurt.
But Jerry Jones and his nosy business, I don't know if they're America's team anymore. People have got to get sick and tired of him. All right, so we're going to talk about the Cowboys. We're going to talk about free agents on the board, what they need, what they should do. Not go too far in the draft, but we will dip into where they might be able to pick up some of the needs in the draft. Why don't you run through some of the free agents on the board for the Cowboys?
Well, why don't we start here a little bit with offense, because that's going to be the pressing and the most publicity-driven ones.
Sure.
So, like many of the teams out there right now, they've got a decision to make with one Dak Prescott. There's talk about him playing under the tag. The other issue is that, the contract, I remember last year when they were still in it and playing a little bit better in the probably first half of the year, some people were saying he could command north of $40 million a year.
Yeah.
Which is obscene, especially given the cap restraints. That obviously is not going to happen. But now with their failures this year, with a relatively loaded team, they got a lot of cap space, but they got a lot open. That's probably going to be the biggest question mark, but just not to be undone by that.
Where are they at in cap?
They are actually the sixth highest. Excuse me, no, ninth highest at $61 million. So they got a fair amount of cap space. But here's going to be the kicker again. We already talked about the quarterback, but remember after the Zeke signing last year, they had the holy triumvirate.
Yep.
Of him, Dak Prescott, and Amari Cooper, who is also a free agent. And mind you, they got Michael Gallup, who played really well for them. As you mentioned to me before we got on here, he's still under his rookie deal. But they also have Randall Cobb and Tavon Austin. And while Randall Cobb and Tavon Austin certainly have either at the end of their career or in Tavon Austin's has never really started,
He's just
they are there. They've got three of their top four receivers returning that got to get paid. And on top of that, they've got their tight end, Jason Witten, who's really probably relegated to their second tight end. But, they don't have a spectacular first option. And Witten did actually score some touchdowns at the end of the year. So they got a lot in flux on offense. They only have one guard out there right now, Xavier Suafalo, which is a Suafilo. Their one guard. So, this is an offense at the skill positions, which command the dollars. They got some room to do. So kind of starting off with that, but let's kind of run through the defense a little bit too. They got some DNs right now. Obviously, they locked up DeMarcus Lawrence last year to a 5-year deal. But they've got Robert Quinn, who's kind of, he was a trade they made, I believe, right? He wasn't cut. He was a trade.
Yep.
And then Michael Bennett, who is kind of a pickup, not mid-season, but during the season. So both guys got a lot of tread on their tires.
Why do I feel like Bennett was with the was with the Eagles too, wasn't he?
He was.
Okay.
He was. And he was cut, I believe. I think it was the Eagles he was cut by. He
Okay.
was with the Eagles, I know, before that, because remember, you'll remember that whole nonsense with, was it at the Eagles game? Wasn't he the one that was going to get arrested and charged for pushing like an old lady when he was jumping over the crowd? That was before he went to, he was with the Eagles. Something like that.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah,
That's
anyway,
the type of guy
he's a little volatile, but they also have tackles, two tackles, Collins and Covington, that, again, Collins, is he a starter?
I'm
He's
not
rotational.
sure,
He's
but
rotational.
Covington, I believe, is.
So they got that. Sean Lee, I think the feeling is that they're going to let Sean Lee walk. He's getting a little long in the tooth.
Yeah, well, they've got what is it, Jalen Smith,
who just got re-up for a nice deal.
and then they've got Leighton Vander Esch, who got a little banged up at the end of the year, and Sean Lee came back in, but he is a young, good, newer version of Sean Lee.
Yeah, I think at the linebacker spot they're okay. Probably going to let that. They got Joe Thomas, an inside linebacker, who's a rotational guy.
Yep.
The interesting part will be at corner. It sounds to me like Byron Jones is headed out the door.
Yep.
So that's a big loss for them. They also got cornerback Anthony Brown and a backup safety and Jeff Heath, right? He's the backup. I don't believe he's a starter.
Yeah, I think he is.
He's a starter?
No,
Oh,
I
he's a
think
backup.
he's,
Okay.
yeah, I think so.
But anyway, the point is they've really, with the exception of offensive line, pretty much every tier from their skill positions on offense all the way down to the three different layers of defense, they've got some names out there that, will definitely hurt their depth. And this is, while they've got this room to move, you think about this, if they franchise Dak, certainly in year one, they're going to get hit with a big cap number, which is going to chew up a lot of that space. And then you sign Amari Cooper. I mean, you could be talking about, at least 2/3 of that available cap space taken up by two guys in one form or another. I think their hope is probably to get something done long-term with Dak. It just depends on how much he puts his heels in the ground. So while they appear to have flexibility, I don't think they have as much flexibility as they need. This is a team that was ready to win last year, and clearly that failed pretty epically.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Last year, and I'd even go so far as to say as the year before.
Yeah, true.
I mean, look, there's only so much time.
Yep.
If they don't get it, then they're going to hit some sort of decline just because of player age, because of free agency.
Yep.
So they have to do something. I'm very interested. I mean, here's the thing. When you look at that free agency board, the top two on the board that they show are Dak and Amari, and that really, in my mind, is really all they need to focus on in their free agency.
Yeah, the problem, though, is...
because it's going to command the majority of their dollars that they want. I mean, you're talking about number one quarterback, number one wide receiver.
Yeah.
I mean, they could then go out and maybe pick up a few other pieces in free agency. But in terms of re-signing guys that are free agents on their team, those are the two guys they need to focus on.
Yeah, here's what's going to be interesting to me is I agree with you like that. They've got a little bit of a conundrum here in the sense that their depth has been that's been a major part of their team for several years, as you mentioned. And it's going to take a major hit on defense. And the question is this offense, if you spend that money, is this offense shown to be that explosive that it can start carrying this defense when they've got some good young talent in the linebacking core? Obviously, DeMarcus Lawrence is a very solid, can be a Pro Bowl type defensive end. But you start getting thin in the secondary. I mean, you start running into problems. And this is an offense that's going to have to score a lot of points. And yeah, we saw flashes of it, but we also saw it go dormant. And the reality is that you're going to put all this money towards that. Now you're making this an offensive team, and what will be very, very interesting to me is, and again, remember, Jerry Jones still runs the player personnel, but look at what kind of offense Mike McCarthy has run. This is a guy that's run without a big name back for a long time, so how does that mold, and is Dak going to be a premier pass thrower? Is he going to – so who's going to adapt here? Is the coach going to be adapting to the players? And if so, is there another gear he can get out of that offense that they haven't been able to get out under Jason Garrett? Possible. Or is he going to find that he needs to reshuffle? I think Dallas is at a major, major crossroads right now.
I agree with you because here's the skinny in my mind, okay? They had some games this year where they lost and they've very possibly could have won, but I saw several times they paid Zeke all this money. He's worth it, I believe, but then they get to a game and they'll start running with Zeke. He'll be doing well, and then that'll disappear for like 2 quarters, and it won't be till like the end of the third or the fourth that we have Zeke Elliott back here. And they'll they believe, yep. I think somewhere they must have believed, hey, Dak is a premier quarterback because they put it on his shoulders to do it. Yep. I think it's a combination of that and having pass catchers like Amari Cooper and Gallup out there with whether it be Cobb or Austin Slot coming in for that other receiver that, hey, they can get it done through the air. Yep. And a lot of times that bit them in the tuchus because they were doing all right with running the ball. And then, I mean, you know what happens when you just go to the air. If you're not getting it done, it's quick offensive game, quick offensive, what's the word I'm looking for? Quick in terms of the offense seeing the field. If they're throwing the ball and it's not successful, they're off the field. The defense is back on.
Yep,
okay? So I don't know, man. There's some things they could do. You said it. I mean, I think Dallas is a team that as long as I've watched him being a Giants fan, does utilize the tight end very well. Okay.
Yep.
And I mean, there's guys out there like Eric Ebron that might be a little more athletic than who they've got right now in terms of the pass game. Now, blocking, yeah, he's so, but they're looking for a tight end that can catch the ball.
Well, there's something to be said for the middle of the field. It's one of the concerns I have, and I remember this because he was on my fantasy team, and I paid particular note to it. You got to be concerned a little bit with the injury potential, too, with Amari Cooper. Now, let me say this. Unlike a lot of receivers I've seen in the last 5-10 years, he gutted it out. But I remember specifically in, I think it was either 4 or 5 weeks, he went from an ankle issue to a knee issue to a thigh issue to a hip issue. And he gutted it out and played through, but he was clearly hurt, wasn't 100%, but he played very tough. He's a tough receiver. He's the kind of guy you like on your team. But again, you're talking about putting a lot of money into that. And I'm not saying he's not worth it, but again, you got to determine what are you going to be. And the most important thing to me, and that's why I would say their QB is the biggest decision, is Dak the guy that's going to do it? And because you got to do it. And I want to stop on something, and I want to get your thoughts on this. And you kind of touched on it, but you made this point, and not only did I see it happen in the game you made the point of, but it happened in the next game, which happened to be the last game for the Cowboys. They came out, it was the last game of the season against the Eagles, correct? Mm-hmm. Right? That was for all the marbles.
Yep.
And they came out, and I believe Zeke went down the field with Zeke, and they pounded the ball, and it was like, wow, okay, that's a Dallas offense that's coming. And he, you always said it. He needs to do that feeding them face.
Yep. When he does the feed me, he is into the game mentally, emotionally, physically, and motivated.
And he disappeared after that, not to his fault, but just because they didn't bring the ball to him. Now they managed to get through that, but then literally almost like you were watching the same game with different uniforms on, they went and played Buffalo. And if you watch that playoff game, Buffalo got took right down the field on defense. And Buffalo's got a good defense. And same thing, feeding him, and they're like, oh, this, and he disappeared, and Buffalo went down and did the same thing on offense. Josh Allen put a good drive together, and then Buffalo proceeded to just take the game over. And even though I would consider it a playoff blowout.
It wasn't a playoff game.
The Buffalo game was a playoff game, wasn't it?
No, it was Thanksgiving. No, because this is NFC AFC. How could it be a playoff game?
Oh, you're right. Okay, whatever. It was
that was
you're right.
The Thanksgiving game they played Buffalo.
Yes, you're right. That's why it was back-to-back. They did the same thing twice. I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting me. But the point of it is they pulled away from that offense, and it was working, and they've got a history of doing that. And the point is, why did you go pay Zeke all that money to go and do that? And now you've got an offensive coach that has never had that dynamic, never coached that dynamic in McCarthy. And I'm curious to see how it all plays out. But the simple fact is they're going to have to sell their farm on something, one or the other, because no way they're accepting a rebuild. And still one of the greatest podcasts. Was it a podcast or was it just a radio? When Jerry Jones, we caught that at the end of the year.
Yeah.
It was all, he hung up on his own guys, his own local radio host.
Yeah.
Or they hung up on him because he was swearing. So, again, this is going to be a weird one. I got to be honest with you. I'm real concerned with where Dallas just, if I looked at it, it was kind of like looking at Cleveland last year when I saw them making those moves. I was like, I get it. You're getting a lot of really cool pieces to a puzzle. It's just they're all from different puzzles. And I feel like Dallas might be getting into that right now. And so this could be the interesting team to watch from either this is going to make them look like geniuses. I'm leaning more towards this could set up their next rebuild.
Could be. I mean, in my mind, if they don't get those two guys back, if they were only to get one, it's going to be Dak in my mind, because they're not going to go out and draft a rookie. And in terms of free agency, who are they going to pick up? As far as I see thus far today, there's like 4 teams in the running for Brady, and they're not one of them. Okay? Yep. It's like the Pats, Tampa Bay, I can't remember. Chargers and like one other team. And they're not one of them. And then look around. Who are the other quarterback free agents? There are a few, but are they going to, they're not going to bring in an old man like Phillip Rivers in lieu of signing Dak, because they're going to have to pay whatever.
Well, no matter what, if they go a different route, unlike, some of the teams that have a young quarterback that maybe is not quite cutting the mustard, like they can't afford that because they don't have Dak will
Right.
not be on a cheap contract. So
Right.
if they go another route, it means Dak's time in Dallas is done.
Yeah, and so I think they'll try to find a way to get that done. Now, if Amari Cooper is going to command too much, the only thing I could say is there's a very deep wide receiver class in this year's draft.
Yep, I agree.
Very deep. And they could potentially go 2 wide receivers just so that if one of them doesn't work out, maybe the other does. You have a young guy like Gallup. These guys will be on rookie deals. I think their focus in free agency outside of re-signing like those 2 guys is probably going to be a lot defensively. They do have DeMarcus Lawrence. They got to find another edge rusher on the other side.
I'm going to tell you, I think they go receiver in the top 3 rounds. The question is, how early do they have to go? If they
they're
don't go Amari
number
Cooper, they got to go.
Yeah,
they got to go.
They're
real
the
early.
number 17 pick. So if Mark Cooper does get done, one of the guys that's looked at as potentially the second best edge rusher in this draft is our boy over at Iowa,
Epineza. Yeah.
Epineza. And at 17, he could still be there because at this point in time, he didn't perform so great in the combine, but I still think he's a solid player. And you have a dynamic player like DeMarcus Lawrence on the other side, just give the kid time to grow. And I also think the same for defensive line all around, like D-tackle. There's a lot in this draft for that. So I think that outside of wide receiver, it's going to be all defense in their draft. So that to me, that tells me if that were the case, outside of looking for the, Dak and Cooper, re-signing them, if they're going to play games in free agency, like I said, they could go tight end. They could go offensive line. There's several offensive linemen out there.
Yep.
Okay, they could go secondary. You got like Ha out there at safety. You got McCourty at safety. You got Trey Waynes, Logan Ryan. There's a lot out there in the defensive backfield as well. I don't know. I think they're going to get the deal with Dak done. I think it's going to put them in a very tough situation this year and moving forward, trying to play a game at quarterback, unless they go draft a quarterback that's going to take over for him. I don't see that happening.
Well, I kind of look at it and I go, if I was to say you got DeMarcus Lawrence, who's your big time player right now, you've got very good young talent in the linebackers with Van Der Esch and with Jalen Smith. Smith's a great story, a guy that had his knee completely nuked. It took him a whole year just to see the field after he was drafted. Dallas took a chance on him and was rewarded.
Yes.
They're rewarded because
Good
he is super athletic. I kind of would agree with you. I think they're going to go free agency. I think they're going to look on offense and then try to build through the draft because they've got a young core of defensive players. They can continue to build young on the defense. And then as you start to see the offensive, but I do think they are going to, like I said, I think they're going to have to go receiver regardless. Because my feeling is if they pay Amari and they pay Dak and that chews up most of their stuff, they're number 3 receiver. I don't think they're going to go back and re-up a Randall Cobb, maybe a Tavon Austin on a real cheap deal, but they're going to want to look for that second to third receiver through the draft, I think. And then I agree with you. I think they'll go heavy defense. If they don't sign Amari, I would think they would go secondary, maybe even go after a corner if they can. Maybe the kid C.J. Henderson out of Florida if he falls. I don't know. It really seems like it's Okudah, maybe Henderson, and then all the rest so far from what I've seen. So I don't know if that's going to be too rich for a 17 slot, but I think we'll have to see. Again, I think we've kind of hit it multiple times. Is the domino is what they do at quarterback and then at receiver. It's still that big 3 that they knew they had to sign going into last year.
Yeah, there are some receivers out there, none that in free agency, none that I could say are like there. Emmanuel Sanders, I think, is the only one that I think maybe would make some sense. You could drop him into a slot. If you re-sign Amari, then you push the 2 outside.
But could you get, for what you're going to spend on Emmanuel Sanders, because again, the problem with it being thin is that's when guys overpay, is it make more sense to take a second rounder and get a similar to potentially a guy with a cheaper, a little bigger opportunity?
Yeah.
So here's the point is, in my mind, I don't know if you'd agree, but in my mind, Dallas is going to have to fill a lot of holes with cheap options because the big holes they're going to fill are going to cost them a lot.
Yeah, I agree. All right, good. So that's the Cowboys. We're going to jump into the last team of the NFC East next, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles.
That'd be Eagles to use locally.
Ugly. All right, folks. See you on the gridiron. As always, we'll be back.